Hello everyone and welcome back to Rick's Garage. Are you sure that classic bike of yours is transferring all its power to the gearbox? On today's episode we take a closer look at QuaranTina's clutch system.
Say hello to the bad side. My emotion is flatline. Hungry demon, what I'm seeing is snack time. When I rush in the grab, I better run from the path line.
A motorcycle's clutch is what connects the engine's power to the transmission. It's designed to allow the rider to manually disengage that connection, allowing the two to spin freely of each other. Pretty helpful for things like coming to a stop without stalling the engine or shifting without grinding gears. Let's zoom in and take a close look at this engineering marvel. Although often referred to as a single object, a clutch is actually an assembly of several different parts. Let's start with the pressure plate. It's held in place under tension provided by several springs and screws. It transfers that tension to the clutch pack, which consists of alternating steel and friction plates. Those plates fit themselves to the inner hub and clutch basket respectively. When it's installed, the clutch basket spins with the rotation of the engine, but isn't connected to the transmission. The inner hub is bolted to the input shaft of the transmission, but has no connection to the engine's power. Now, if we separate two individual plates from the clutch pack, we can see that the friction disc has teeth on its outer edge that fit into slots on the clutch basket. This allows the friction disc to spin with the basket, but doesn't affect the inner hub. By contrast, the steel plate has teeth on its inner surface that engage grooves on the inner hub. This allows the steel plate to spin with the transmission, but doesn't affect the clutch basket or friction disc. Because these plates can slide sideways in their respective grooves, we can squeeze them together, gradually increasing friction until the two parts start moving together as one. As the outer clutch basket spins, the rotational power is transmitted to the inner hub, which spins the gearbox and gets the rear wheel moving. If we release the clamping force, the friction disc and steel plate spin independently again, effectively disconnecting the engine's power from the transmission. In an assembled clutch pack, there are several of each kind of plate, used to increase strength and surface area for friction to take hold. In operation, the amount of pressure applied to the clutch pack will vary. This is to avoid sudden jerky starts and provide a smooth transfer of power when switching gears. The pressure plate, as mentioned earlier, is installed with springs and bolts that are screwed into the inner hub. As the bolts are tightened, the pressure plate squeezes the clutch pack tightly enough for the friction discs to do their work. To release the clutch pack, the pressure plate is pushed outwards, allowing the plates to spin freely again. Behind the clutch assembly, there is a push rod that runs through the input shaft and is controlled by an actuator arm. When the clutch lever is pulled, the actuator arm pushes the rod against the back of the pressure plate, releasing the tension on the clutch pack. When the clutch lever is released, the springs push the pressure plate back against the clutch pack, re-engaging the engine to the gearbox. Since QuaranTina has been sitting for so long, who knows what kind of shape the clutch components are in. When she was up on the stand, the clutch was sticking a bit, which could be caused by a few different components, so the best course of action is to open everything up for an inspection. Now, as always, there's a few steps that are going to be specific to the XS750, but almost all wet plate motorcycle clutches assemble and function the same way. Once the oil's been drained and the primary cover is off, disconnect and remove the primary chain. On the XS750, you'll remove a snap ring and slide the clutch damper out of the sprocket. Next, pull off the outer clutch basket to expose the pressure plate. Remove the screws holding down the pressure plate to slide it off with the clutch pack and set it aside. With the clutch pack on the bench, it allows me to check the friction plates for thickness, and once they're verified, they get a quick scuff with some 100 grit sandpaper to remove any glazing, and set in a container to soak in motor oil overnight. To anyone who thinks that the plates don't need to soak that long, you are absolutely right. You really only need about an hour or so in the oil, but it was getting late when I was filming this, so they stayed in overnight. The steel plates get measured for warpage and then get run across a wet sheet of 400 grit sandpaper to make sure the friction discs have something flat to grab onto. Once the clutch pack was sorted, I found that the inner hub and clutch basket both needed some work. The slots that the clutch pack slides along had deep grooves worn into them from years of vibration and hard engagements. It took some imagination to remove the hub and some elbow grease with a diamond grit file, but now the plates have a smooth surface to move along and there's nowhere for them to get stuck. Reassembly is pretty straightforward. The friction discs and steel plates get installed in an alternating order, and in the case of the XS750, the steel plates have an outer tab. They get lined up with an arrow on the inner hub, and as each steel plate is installed, it gets rotated clockwise to the next arrow. This bike also has a block that sits perpendicular through the input shaft and is actually what pushes against the back of the pressure plate to release it. If your bike has something similar, be sure you reinstall it before the pressure plate goes on, because it's an easy part to forget. Now, if you're like me and you don't have the specialty clutch alignment tool, just remember not to completely tighten the pressure plate down right away. This will allow you to shift the friction discs to align the tabs with the slots on the clutch basket. Once they're all lined up, tighten all the screws down to OEM torque spec. The primary chain is next, and it's connected via the clutch damper, which also got stripped down and cleaned out while everything was apart. With the main bearing and the newly fabbed chain tensioner back in place, the primary cover is reinstalled, and once the last few bolts are tightened, this side is done. Now, I know this is a lot of work, but don't worry guys, we're almost done. On the other side of that push rod is the actuator arm that gets everything moving. It's an easily overlooked part, but it's important to make sure that it's clean and can move freely. With the actuator out of the way, check around the push rod seal for any signs of an oil leak and replace it if necessary. Alright, once the tension is set on the lever, the clutch will be able to properly transfer power to the gearbox to get that back wheel turning. I hope this video has been able to shed some light on your own clutch inspection, and if so, hit that like button, and while you're here, subscribe with notifications so you'll always be up to date on my new content. I'm Rick the Welder, and as always, thank you all very much for watching.